So we've got a big release with DaVinci Resolve 16 this year, but what I wanted to talk about in this video is we've been thinking a lot about editing, specifically the speed of editing. You know, I've come from a TV commercial post-production background, and you know, what I've noticed about editing software is it doesn't really quite work the way TV commercial editors work. You know, editors doing TV commercials don't really use some of the features in traditional editing software because they just don't have the time. So we really were thinking about that and sort of, you know, really doing a lot of sort of discussion about how we might increase the speed of editing. And it's not just TV commercial guys as well. I mean, you know, TV commercial guys, we've got 3 clients coming through a day, you know, knocking out stuff really quickly, stuff we haven't seen before. And so, you know, that was at the top of our mind because obviously DaVinci Resolve is really important in the high-end part of the industry. But we were also thinking about news, and you know, people doing news got some of the same time constraints. And not only that, what's interesting about the way DaVinci fits in with news is that, you know, in the old days you'd knock out a minute or so segment for a news program and it would be discarded. But now those stories are turning into magazine shows and also becoming documentaries. So DaVinci's finishing all those, and that's why we've got some of our high-end cameras being used in news now, because you know, the news part of the of TV station is actually now producing content which can be sold. So it's becoming more of a revenue generation area because they're using it as a source of creating a lot of programming and things like that. But one of the other areas too that I think is really important, that I do think also suffer from the same speed issue, is high-end YouTube guys. I mean, you've got people on YouTube are often going to a conference or something and they're knocking out 4 or 5 different 15-minute episodes a day, and they're doing it from a hotel room, and they're presenting and shooting it themselves, and it's got high-end production values. You know, I've never believed that YouTube was a market. I've always thought that YouTube was just a delivery platform, and the guys doing high-end work on YouTube, I mean, sure, there's consumers on there, but the guys doing high-end work are doing incredibly difficult stuff and incredible tiny budgets. And so we've never made crap products for the YouTube market, which is what you hear a bit. We've always felt that the YouTube guys need to be lifted up, and we need to produce high-end tools. You know, when I was younger, I didn't want to use crap tools because I couldn't afford them. I wanted great tools, and so we were really thinking about how we could help the YouTube guys move up as well. So it kind of came out of the TV commercial background that I've had, but we're thinking about news, thinking about guys, you know, the constraints on YouTube guys, really just thinking about anyone who needs to knock out content really fast. In many ways, and sometimes it's, you know, people that have got the focus on the program they're doing, they're less into the video editing part. So, you know, so we felt like speed is a real issue, and we wanted to really think about that deeply. Now, we didn't change the edit page. I think the culture is different. The interesting thing about the edit page is people doing TV programming, doing movies, work like that. And I felt like the culture was different enough that it wasn't something that we should touch. We actually need to accommodate 2 different cultures. In fact, there's really 2 different edit cultures. In fact, I think there's 3, but I'll get to that in a minute. But I felt like there's actually really different cultures. So we felt like we needed to add another page. And the reason we've sort of come to that conclusion is we've used our manufacturing experience actually and applied it to editing. You know, what's interesting about manufacturing is, and we're pretty good at it, people think, you know, factories they're not, you know, cool in pop culture. But what's interesting about factories is that, you know, every movement that isn't productive is considered waste. In fact, everybody in a manufacturing process works together really closely to remove and eliminate waste. Anything you do that doesn't actually produce something productive is considered waste. So we started thinking, well, how does that matter when it comes to editing? I mean, if you think about it, when you're editing on the, say, the edit page, how much time are you actually spending doing something that's not producing any results, like I'm zooming or moving around, things like that? So you realize it actually really adds up. So on this new page, we felt like every single action should do something, and that would be a pretty good goal. So maybe what it's worth doing is I'll quickly show you by going to the edit page and having a bit of a look on some of the things that I feel are a little slow. So if you look at the edit page here, you can see I've got an edit up. Now, obviously, the most obvious annoyance I find is the vertical scrolling. I mean, how many times you've got a couple of tracks and the video scrolls off, and I think the vertical scroll bar is kind of annoying. Even the horizontal scroll bar, I mean, you know, you're moving around. You know, we've got these great contextual tools, but to use them, you've kind of got to zoom out, you know, in to see where you are, or sort of zoom in to get good control of the tools. And look, it works really well, but you do tend to find you you're scrolling around horizontally, or you've got to zoom out to sort of see where you're at, move to a different part of the timeline, then kind of zoom in again. So horizontal, scrolling, zooming, all these things are sort of, they feel like they're wasted time. Even the bin, I mean, you're dealing with thousands of clips or hundreds of clips. Dealing with the bin is slow. You start to think, what is slow? There's quite a lot that can be considered slow. But the good thing is, this is very traditional. It's got everything everyone's always asked us for. We've done the right thing by making this edit page work this way. But it's a very traditional page. What we wanted to do is try something new. So add something new that gives us a chance to explore new options, but it doesn't pollute the professional editing page that we have. So we've got a new page called the Cut page, and you can see it down the bottom here. And that gives us the ability to add a new page and add new workflows without affecting any of the other workflows that are here. Remember, DaVinci Resolve is based on cultures. So, you've got Fusion for visual effects guys, you've got Color for colorists, Fairlight for audio engineers. And in fact, you can do color correction in the Fairlight, in the Fusion page, but it's done in a way that visual effects artists need. So this is where the Cut page gives us a whole new page and actually a new culture. And that's what the pages really represent in DaVinci, the different cultures. So the big question is we asked ourselves, because it's designed to edit fast, what can we remove? In many ways, by removing stuff, we can, because we've got the edit pages always there. This is specifically designed for cutting fast, but what it means, because the edit page is still there, we can actually remove some things because you can always go to the edit page. So it's great. It gives us a chance to try new ideas, specifically design it for cutting really quickly. There's nothing slow in there at all, and every action does something. But without affecting you can always go back to the edit page if you don't, like work. In fact, in some ways, we were thinking, you could start out cutting in the Cut page and then move across the edit page once you need to do some more finessing. You could basically use them both in combination, or you might want to just, you might be doing a job that you can completely finish in there. So every action does something, and also the tools are intelligent. You say 3-point editing. The problem with 3-point editing is the third point. Well, what about if the tools can work out where you want to put things in the timeline? Let's think about that. One of the other things we've also done is the features are visible. The edit page is so complex and there's so many features that a lot of them are hidden behind contextual menus, or there might be a mode that affects something. We wanted all the features to be visible in the Cut page. But as I said, you've always got the edit page there for traditional editing. Having the edit page means we can sort of strip out things from the Cut page to just stuff that's fast, because we know it's there. We've got that edit page to support us. So it is an independent page and it's an independent culture, but in some ways the traditional edit page can always be that foundation to allow it to be used in context on depending what you're working, depending how you're working. I think that's what it's a different cultural thing, but you can span cultures as well. So we think the Cut page is a revolution in editing. We've done a lot of stuff by just completely reinventing the way things are done. And we don't think that there's really been a complete relook at how editing has been done as a process in really a long time. I mean, the edit page is really just a collection of stuff that people have asked us to do. We've done a lot of design layouts and things, but in many ways we wanted a chance to kind of really reinvent a way a lot of things work and how you can interact with them. And so this is kind of why I'm doing this video, to give you a bit of a background story. There's a lot of ideas in this page, but it's sort of, in many ways we feel like it's only half finished because there's a lot of little finessing things that we need to do. But we have got to this point now where we don't feel that we can move much forward. We can't move forward much faster than this because there's so many questions about how we should polish off some of these features. So we really need to talk to the DaVinci Resolve community and get this out there and see how we go. So let's have a look at the Cut page. So I'll switch across. There it is there. Now what I might do is I might just delete all the media I have in here so I can start fresh and I can show you how it works. So we've worked very hard, as I said, to make this a complete change in how we're editing, but you can see there's some similarities. It's not so crazily different that you can't recognize it. But let's have a bit of a look at the user interface, and we can show you, I'll go through the user interface and show you how some of the things work. So what's really important about this is it also handles smaller monitors. We've got customers that are out in, like a lot of people do guerrilla shoots nowadays. They rush off, like we do, the pocket camera was sort of designed for that. It's a full digital film camera, but it's in what looks a bit like a still camera. So people can go out and do guerrilla shoots, and they can just go in an alley somewhere and do a fashion shoot. And often they're doing DaVinci Resolve grading on set, but they're also editing maybe in a cafe nearby, and they can pick up any other shots if they realize they haven't quite got it right. you can pretty much do a rough cut on set. So we wanted this page to be able to handle smaller monitors. So you can see that a lot of things we've done to save real estate, and smaller monitors is really important. So we don't need a 1080 size monitor. In fact, you can do everything in this page. You can actually acquire, edit, and deliver all in this page. So small monitors have been a really an important goal for this. Now, if you look up the top here, you can see that we've got the bin here, but we've also got transitions, titles, effects. So we've got all those things here. So you can access them. And you can also resize. You can resize the viewer to change its size. So you can do all those things. But like we'll do first, let's, well, in fact, I'll show you how to import the media. I've already got some media in here, so I'll get rid of that because I'll bring it back in again. So you can do that right from here. You don't need to use the media page. Up the top here, we've got either individual, being able to import files, or you can import a whole folder. So we'll open up a whole folder. There's our disk there, and that's the folder of media we want, and we'll open it up, and there it is. We'll also create a new timeline in here, and there's going to be our edit. Now, what you'll notice is that what we've done is we've changed, you can change between bins. On the edit page, we have a sidebar here, which takes a bit of space. So you can just change between bins here. I can go into that bin with the media in it, and that's the folder. So you can just change between bins. I've also got different ways of looking at the bins. I've got, the ability to see an icon view here, but I can also change between a list view, which is traditional, but I've also got this clip view, which and with the clip view, it's quite nice. You can move around and see the whole clip's laid out, and it scrolls vertically. It's quite a nice way to look at things, but I'll go back to the icon view here so you can see that. Now, the other thing you'll have noticed is there's actually a dual timeline here. We have, one of the problems with the edit page is all this zooming in and out. So what we've decided to do is make a dual timeline. So the top part of the timeline here is the entire edit. The bottom part of the timeline is a zoomed in section. What this lets us do, and they're both really active timelines, they both operate. You can operate in both, and they're both synchronized. What it means you can do is you can always see the entire edit, but you zoomed in enough for the contextual menu tools, the contextual tools to work. So we've got the ability to, like in the edit page, you've got to zoom out to see where you are, then you zoom in and you use the contextual tools. The tools don't work very well when you zoomed out too far. But in this, in the cut page, we have two simultaneous timelines and they're interactive. You can work between them. So let's drag a couple of clips in and we'll see how it works. So I'll just drag some stuff in, there it is. And you can see how this is working. So I've got the top timeline is showing all those clips in here, and the bottom timeline, which scrolls around, is showing me a zoomed in version of it. So I can come along here, I can see the transition in here, and these all work. I can move clips around between the timelines and rearrange things, put them on different layers, whatever I like. This top timeline is an active timeline. It actually works. Now, at the moment, you can see that these scroll bars are working. The bottom one's actually a live scroll. The top one is a moving CTI. We'll probably have an icon over the left-hand side here to allow you to switch the bottom timeline, the lower timeline between those two different modes, because a lot of people don't want to have to move that. But yeah, we'll add, there's things to talk about at the show where we'll be able to change some of these things. Now you can trim in the timelines here. So if I go along here, you can see I can trim here. All the contextual menu tools work fine because I've got the ability to trim. They're always visible, but I can also trim up here. So you can see I can do all that trimming here. Now, the other thing I need to show you is trimming. Now, if I open up a clip in here, you can see that I can, I've got a combined scroll bar and trimming. Now, this is actually more accurate. A lot of editors, what they do is they throw a whole bunch of stuff into the timeline and chop out all the stuff that I need. Now, we actually kind of just did that. But what happens if you want to do it the other way around, where you really want to be much, much more accurately trimming content before you put it in the timeline? Well, we've got a completely revised scroll bar here, so you can see you can scroll through the media, but you've also got the ability to trim in here, and the trimming can be quite accurate. So let me show you that. So down the bottom here, I've got the in and out points. The graphics here aren't quite right, but that's the beta build. And I can go along here, and I can set it. Now I can also set in and out points. I can set the out point through there. So you can see that I've got a, it's not drawing the audio waveform properly in this build, the wonders of beta software. But what we've got is the ability to move around the timeline, but I can also trim in here as well. And you can see that I can then change the length of the clips, of the clip in here, and then I can do various edit functions with that. Now, What I've also got is scratch trimming. The problem with the trimming just by using an in and out point is if you've got a really long clip, then the difficulty is that as you're moving this, it can actually be tens of seconds of trimming with each pixel that you're moving. So this varies a little bit based on how long the clip is. If the clip's short, you can trim it more accurately. So we wanted to actually allow you to trim independently of how long the clip is. So if you go to the sides here, this is called scratch trimming. And what you can do is when you trim that, the same amount of mouse movement is going to do the same amount of trimming, and you can see the frame numbers changing there. And here's the out point one. And these are mouse relatives, so you're not actually clicking, like, even though this is on the right-hand side, you can move the mouse quite away and move quite back, But the good thing is it's a fixed amount of trim depending on how far you move the mouse, so it doesn't matter how long the clip is. If you're moving in here and you say, okay, this is the bit I want here, you put an out point in, now you can scratch trim that up to get it exactly where you kind of want. It doesn't matter how long that clip is. That could be an hour clip in there, or it could be a 15-second clip. That scratch trimming is always going to behave the same way. So scratch trimming is quite powerful. Now, we also have, as I mentioned, the edit modes are intelligent. What we really want to do is not have to put in points on the timeline. You really want it to sort of think for itself a little bit more, so you can work faster. So let me, what I'll do is I'll delete the clips on the timeline. Get rid of those so we can drop some stuff in. Let's go to we'll go to the wide shot. We've got a wide shot here somewhere, this is it. And let's put a in point in here and an out point in there. And we'll be able to do some edits, and I can show you how this works. Now we've got, on the left-hand side here, this is where the edit modes are. Now, as I mentioned, they're a little different. So I'll go through them and explain what they are, and then I can show you a couple of them. Now we've got Smart Insert as the first one. Now that's a bit different to a normal insert, because what it'll do is instead of in a normal insert, you've got to basically cut the clip and put it in. This will look for the transition closest to where the CTI is in the timeline and insert there. It'll assume that you want to insert in a gap that you already have. So it's a bit smart on that. You don't need to put an in point on the timeline. It'll just find the spot. It knows that that's probably where you want it and put it in for you. Append is the same as append to end. That's adding clips to the end. If you're grabbing content and laying it out, that's the one you use the most, and it just keeps adding clips to the end. We've got ripple overwrite. Great thing about ripple overwrite is if you want to replace a shot, you can do that with ripple overwrite. It'll swap the shot out and ripple the timeline length. One thing we've really focused on this page is not obsessing about fixed program lengths. So these days, most programs can be variable length because the online streaming platforms, YouTube, or all these other platforms don't really specifically care about program length. But you can. There's a lot of really powerful trim modes that we've got in the cut page, which let you then trim it to the length you want. But that's why ripple overwrite we think is a more important transition. The next one is we've got close up. Now close up is really quite interesting. What it does is often a lot of people are shooting single camera and they want to get close-ups from that camera. So you shoot a bit wide, and then what you want to do is get a bit close. So all you have to do is go to the point you want in your clip and then work out the source, work out your in and out points. And then when you do that edit, it'll actually sync that clip to the clip on the timeline, and it'll zoom it in a little bit so you can essentially get a close-up. And you can roll along and basically just get close-ups, and adds a bit of variation, but you're creating your close-ups from that slightly wide shot. So you can do single camera shooting and then do the close-ups you need. Now place on top is pretty obvious. It's the traditional place on top. It'll drop it on top of the timeline. And source override is another new edit mode, which I think is pretty powerful. What it does is if you're doing an interview and you've got, say, 3 cameras, you've got a wide shot, maybe you're doing an interview, you've got three cameras, wide shot of the interviewer and the interviewee, you've got a close-up of the interviewer and a close-up of the interviewee. Now, what I would do is I would edit the base track would be from the wide shot. So you trim a bit off the front, trim a bit off the end, and that would become basically your program length. Now you could use multicam for this, but what it lets you do is you can then go to the close-up of the interviewer and just scroll along and look for bits where they're talking animatedly or they're getting excited, and just mark in and out on that and then do a source override. What it'll do is it'll look for the time code in the clip that's on the timeline already, and it'll look for the time code that syncs to that in the source clip, match them together, and it'll place it on the timeline on a layer above, synchronized. So what it means is instead of, if you had a 40-minute interview, in multicam you've got to go through 40 minutes of that to get, to choose all your shots. But if and of course you've got interruptions to recording, that creates more complexity. But with source override, all you need to do is lay down your base track and then just drop extra cutaways on top, and it'll automatically synchronize them onto the timeline as you go. It's really quite powerful, and it lets you build up a sort of like a multicam, but doing it in pieces. Particularly good when you've got disrupted content. So that's how we do that. So let's have a look at some of the edit modes. We'll do a bit of a demo. We'll demo append first. That's the simplest one. That's the one you're often doing. Now I've selected a clip here, so let's just click append. There it is there. Let's find something else. So this is what would happen. Say if you were doing a show where you had different, like maybe you'd shot something, like I was watching a guy rebuild a car engine on YouTube the other day. He shot that single camera. He's just gone through, as he's done the engine rebuild, he's just basically shot that process. Now if you just, with append, you just add various shots in time, you pick out the bits you want, just go append, there it is there, and you can see you're just building up a timeline. Let's get, now this is actually basically a multicam type shot. So this is not really shot for appending to the end, because these are different camera views, the content I've got here, but you can see, append to end lets you build up a timeline here. Now, the reason I wanted to do that is let's do a source override. In fact, what I'll do is I'll delete the content. I'll delete everything from here. I'll put down the wide shot I've got here. I'll drop that into the timeline. And then now I've got my whole timeline is that. In fact, I need to trim a little bit off the front, so let's trim a little bit off there, because I think it starts with a clapper. Now here's my timeline, here's my base layer. So let's show source overwrite with this. So let's go to a close-up. In fact, what we'll do is we'll go to a bit where she's cutting something there. You can see she's cutting something. Let's find the chopping board part, chopping board clip. Now if I push F, I can match frame. Now what it's done is it's matched this clip's frame I've got in the viewer here to the shot that's in the timeline. So I can mark an in point on that, and I'll scroll down a little bit and maybe mark an out point. I might scratch trim that a little bit just to move it a bit further down. Now as you notice, as I'm scratch trimming, you notice it's drawing the zoomed in version of the audio waveform. Lets you cut against dialogue, and I can then make sure that my out point matches just after she finishes speaking or before she starts talking. Now if I do a source override, what it's going to do now is scroll, it's added that shot and it's synchronized to where she's cutting. So it's gone and taken the source timecode of this clip, the in point, and it's synchronized the timecode that was already on the timeline. Now that's pretty powerful, because what it means I can do is I can go along here and just look really for anywhere where she's doing anything. Like for example those shots there. I could then take an in point of that and an out point of that and go source overwrite. And what I'm doing is I'm dropping all these views down onto the timeline as the cutaways. And so you can basically lay down your base layer, then go to one of the cutaways. As long as the time codes, all the cameras had time of day code, we obviously need to add some other ways of synchronizing the various camera shots. But for the moment, it uses time of day code that you record on the cameras. You can pretty much just roll along the cutaways and just find interesting bits, mark in, mark out, drop it into source override. So you can see how powerful source override can be. Now the other one we can do is, let's go back here somewhere and we'll do a close-up. So if I go to, well actually let's find a spot here where they're together, and we can go across back to this clip here, and we can do a match frame, and we'll put an in point there, and we'll move down and do an out point. Now if I do close-up, what it's going to do is, let's move down here a bit, it's going to move, so what it's done is it's put the same clip on top of the other clip, but it's zoomed it in a bit. Now it's worth noting that we have some of the settings in here, so I can go into this section here. Whoops, I need to go into this clip, it's the one I want, and I can just move it down a little bit so we can just get it looking good as a close-up. There it is there. And so now what I've got is a really nice little close-up, and I can zoom it back and do a bunch of other changes to it. But you can see how close-up just makes it super easy to create essentially a close-up camera view from the one wide shot, so you can do single camera shooting. So you can see that's pretty exciting. Now, you can do all kinds of trimming in the timeline. Now, the timeline supports trimming in a number of different ways. So if you look down at the lower timeline here, you can see that I can do various trimming, and I'm going to wreck my synchronization here because I'm going to show you some of the trimming. Really, I wouldn't want to do some of the trims I'm about to do, but you can see I can do trimming here on the in point. I can do the same thing on the out point. I can actually slip the clip. So if you look at this shot here, this will slip in. This is where I lose my synchronization, but I'm slipping the clip up and down. So In the edit page, we can do all the trimming on the edit points, but slipping, you'd have to change tools. In here, again, that philosophy of just being able to do everything directly, we have an icon on the clip, and we can slide it up and down in there. So you can go and directly slip a clip without needing to change tools. Now, maybe some of these things might wind up on the edit page as well, but we'll let people tell us what they think you want to steal from here and put in the edit page, and there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff people want to steal from the edit page and put in here. That's going to be some fantastic conversations we'll be able to have. Of course, you can move clips in here too. You can move it up to an extra layer. You can do a whole bunch of other stuff. And that's the lower timeline. But also it's worth noting in here that when I do trimming, the trim editor is coming up. Now there's a trim editor in the viewer and it's appearing. And so what that lets me do is I can do fairly coarse trimming down here. And that's letting me do a lot. And I can of course trim up here, but in the trim editor you can see I've got a scratch type trimming and it's very fine. I can do very fine adjustments. And I can move it quite a lot. And I get these frame counts to show me how far out I'm trimmed from what my trim point is. Not only that, I've also got some audio there so you can see where I'm trimming any fine points that you can cut against. There's also nudging. I can nudge individual frames of my trim point, and that all works. So you can see there's quite a lot of power in trimming. But not only that, like I was saying before, the upper timeline is also just as important. I can trim in here, and I think so you see I can move clips around. I can trim them, change length. You can see they're interacting directly together. You can see they're completely synchronized and locked together. I can also move a clip from the below here and drag it up down the right-hand side of the timeline and maybe drop it down the end here and put it down here. So you can see that I can pull a clip up and move it all the way down the timeline and bring it back to the other side. I could move this down and drag it down and put it in the gap. So you can move clips up and down timelines, move around really fast. It's really quite nice. So let's go down the end here. One of the other features I want to show you as well is I've been doing some of the trimming in the timeline here. You can see the contextual chill changes give me the ability, a lot of control over that. But also, one of the other problems with when you're editing is sometimes I just want to drop dissolves into various transitions. Sometimes I don't. And it can be annoying to sort of come up here and go, okay, I've got to put a transition in or a filter, or, a transition. What I really want to do is just be able to basically switch transitions. So if you look at the buttons here, I can add a dissolve by basically just turning it on, or I can turn it off, which is kind of nice. I've also got the smooth cut transition. So a lot of people that are doing interviews, they cut pieces out and find that they've got jump cuts. Having the smooth cut transition here is really useful because it gives you that smooth blend. Now this is two very dissimilar clips, so it's the wrong type of transition here. But you can see that I get the ability to basically just switch in and out transitions, which is really useful. And you can also trim the duration of the transition, and you can do it here too. Yeah, doing it here is very smooth. You can see this transition's longer than what will fit in this space here, so it's now counting up by multiples of 3 in the frames, but you still have the ability to scratch individual frames in length. In fact, it's 2 frames per movement because you're trimming a frame off either side of the transition, but you can see what I mean. You've got the ability to trim in 3 places. You can do quite coarse trimming in the upper timeline, more finer trimming in the lower timeline, and then frame accurate trimming in the trim editor. So you can see how they all interact with each other. You've literally got 3 different user interfaces all working at the same time. It's extremely powerful. Okay, so the next big thing to talk about is bins. Now, this is another area that I think is a big issue. Bins are very slow. One of the things about linear editing, and one of the things we've lost in some ways, is that it was very fast to find shots because you just had a tape. I mean, you could just put the cassette in. Here's a cassette here. This is the sticker of a company I used to work for. But I didn't steal this tape. That was given to us recently, but it's a very old tape. So this tape, you could just scroll up and down the tape. All the shots are on here, and you can just pick which shots you wanted. The problem with linear editing is you've got hundreds of clips, and you've got to go through and find clips, and no one's got time to label clips. If you're doing programming work, people did have time to do that. You could get all the clips, label them, work out what you had, put them in different bins, and organize everything. People don't really have a lot of time for that. So what we wanted to do is recreate the tape, and we have, and we've called it source tape. So if we go up into the top here, you'll notice there's these buttons here, and now we're on the timeline currently. But if I go and click to this button, what you see it's done is it's gone and got all the clips in the bin, and they've basically arranged them all into one long tape. Now I think there's about an hour of content here. But you can now scroll through, and this is just different camera shots. So you can see I can scroll all the way up and down here now, and I can do in and out points of anywhere I like, and I can take stuff. So you can see how really nice, and I can also switch to a single clip view. I can switch to the source tape, and I can switch back to the timeline. It really lets me switch. But of course, if I'm in a source tape, and I start moving here, it just immediately switches back to the timeline. So you can see how really exciting it is. And not only that, when I go back into the source tape, you can see that as I'm moving around, you can see that the bin is actually highlighting the clip. So you can, of course, go back up here and double-click that clip anytime you like. But you can see when I use a source tape, I'm getting that bin highlighting. And if I go to the clip view, maybe you can see it a bit better there. So it's really quite powerful. And also in list view. So you get that interaction between the bin and the viewer. And all your media is there. You can play through it. So you can see it's pretty nice. Now, what's interesting about this is that if you have got, and I'm going to pause for a moment here and just maybe talk about this. If you've got content, because I want to show you how you can resort this stuff, but if you have content it's come from someone, you didn't shoot it, which is really common, particularly in TV commercials and things like that, you've got to check out your media. Well, the great thing about the source tape is you can just scroll through and have a really quick look at exactly what you've got. And there's an hour of media there, and I know exactly what I have now just by scrolling up and down. But we've also got this button here. Now what this does is it does a fast playback. It's quite clever actually, it does a fast play, it's basically a fast review. It plays back all your media, but depending how long the clip is, it'll play it back quickly, but not so quickly that you can't see what's going on. But if you've got short clips, it'll slow down the playback so that those clips don't go through so quickly. So it's like almost a dynamic fast playback, and it even works in the timeline. It gives you the ability to kind of just review your footage. So if you get a bunch of media in, you could scroll through it, but you could just play the fast review and just have a quick look and it'll play it through quickly. Particularly if you've got a lot of varying lengths. You might have a couple of shots that are a couple of minutes long. You might have a whole bunch of other shots that are 5 seconds or 10 seconds long, really depending on what's been shot. That fast review will dynamically change the playback speed. So let's, so I've shown you the bin scrolling. So let's actually see how you can rebuild the source tape, because you can sort the bin and it'll rebuild the source tape. So if you look up the right-hand side here, I've got some different orders. I can do timecode order. So it's just rebuilt the source tape. I can go camera order. I can go duration order, or I can do the clip file name order. And now what it's done is it's rebuilt the entire source tape. So if you've got a bunch of content like this is, these shots are all the same time codes, but side by side, or you can use the file names. You can rearrange it depending how you want to find shots. If you've shot stuff in a linear order with a single camera, like that engine rebuild show I was talking about, everything's in timecode order, so you can just scroll along the source tape, grabbing in and out points and just adding stuff that you need. But if it was multi-camera, then you might want to work in this area here, and then do that, go in from there. So let's see how fast that is. All I'll do is I'll delete the clips I've got on the timeline again, and let's create something. So let's go. Well, we'll put a we'll do an in and out point. Let's lay a clip down there, and we'll do an append to end. And I'll use my source tape now. Let's just use I should use the source tape from the front. So maybe we like this. Let's grab something from there, append to end. Let's say we like this bit. Now these are all different camera views, so it's not really the right kind of footage for this kind of demo, but there's a bit of content. So you can see I can just build up. I can just scroll along all my media, pick whatever shots I want, and drop them down into the timeline. And if this was something like, say, for example, if this was a single camera cooking show, I could just roll down here and just append all the various bits. But this is multi-camera, so no one camera really follows all the action because you've got different views, so the cameras tend to stay their shots. This is not quite the way you'd use this feature, but you can see I've got a whole bunch of stuff built, and you can see how powerful it is, just being able to scroll down your entire bin with the media, mark in and out, drop it in, drop it in, drop it in, and it's done. So it becomes very fast to build edits very, very quickly. And this is what this page is all about. Now there's a whole bunch of other there'll be a bunch of other videos online on our website and everything that'll show you in more detail how this all works. But I just wanted to give you a bit of an overview on how this feature works. You can start to see really the benefits of the source tape. Now the other thing that worth mentioning before I go on to the next topic is, again, we wanted you to be able to work completely inside this page, which means you can also deliver and upload media from the cut page. If you look over here, we've got a button, and this brings up a box, and I can choose different services. Now you can log in, like on the YouTube and Vimeo, you can even put the account details and it'll upload it directly. Or I can pick other formats and it'll generate, I can export and bring up, you know, the save dialog and just basically render out from here. Now that menu is available on all the pages, so you can do it from any of the pages, but it's particularly nice in here because this page is the page you'd probably be using on a smaller monitor on a laptop if you're out editing on set. So that's that. So that's the fundamentals of how it works, and there's going to be some other videos that show you a bit more detail about how some of these things work, but I wanted to give you a more overview of kind of why we've done some of these things and the major functionality.